Aidan Mahaney is leaving St. Mary's to go play for the back-to-back national champions, but is he good enough to help lead UConn to a three-peat?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's Tuesday edition of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. Well, Lisa Fortier's team just landed a transfer who spent the past 2 seasons with the UConn Huskies. Andrew Nembhard is killing it in the NBA playoffs with the Indiana Pacers. We're going to talk about all of that. But we are leading off today's show talking about the big news out of the WCC. Aidan Mahaney, the star guard for the last 2 years under Randy Bennett and the St. Mary's Gales. He has found his new home after entering the transfer portal a couple of weeks ago. He is going to Storrs, Connecticut to play for Danny Hurley and the back-to-back national champion UConn Huskies. There's a lot to unpack here about Mahaney's decision to go to UConn. First of all, it means that for a third year in a row, Gonzaga and Aidan Mahaney will face each other. Just because he has transferred from St. Mary's does not mean he has gotten away from Gonzaga. And for Gonzaga, just because he's not at St. Mary's doesn't mean they've gotten away from Aidan Mahaney, because boy, has he done a number on the Zags the last couple of years. Certainly seems to be the kind of young man who plays up in those best games, in those challenging competitions, I should say. And he did that the last couple of years against Gonzaga. And now he will be on this UConn team on December 14th when Gonzaga goes to New York to play UConn at the Madison Square Garden, part of that home and home series that had a game in Seattle this past year. Now the return game will be in New York. Already going to be an incredibly exciting matchup. Gonzaga gets to go play the back-to-back national champions at basketball's Mecca, at the basketball arena in the country. There is already so much excitement around Gonzaga playing UConn at the Madison Square Garden. But now you factor in Aidan Mahaney being in the mix, probably being a starter for UConn. We'll get to that in a second. That just makes even more intrigue for what is already one of the most exciting non-conference basketball games that Gonzaga is going to really play in a long time. You've had the great MTEs, the game against Duke in 2018, etc. Obviously, the start of this UConn series was fantastic. They've hosted North Carolina and Texas. They've had a lot of great non-conference games recently. But this is, I'm 99% sure they didn't play Florida in 2008, which means this is the time that Gonzaga has played a back-to-back national champion. So this is an incredibly exciting game. And now, with UConn losing 4 of their 5 starters, maybe all 5, Alex Karaban has declared for the NBA draft. He doesn't look like he's going to be a surefire first-round pick, so he may end up returning to UConn. He's already had some quotes about wanting to be a part of a three-peat. So if Alex Karaban comes back, that's one of UConn's returning starters. But Donovan Clingan is going to the NBA. He's not coming back. Stephon Castle, he's not coming back. And their 2 starting guards, Tristan Newton and Cam Spencer, they're both out of eligibility. So they can't come back, even if they wanted to. So Danny Hurley's got the cupboard's bare. Now, the cupboard was pretty bare after their first championship. They lost Adama Sanogo to the NBA, Jordan Hawkins to the NBA, Joey Calcaterra, who was a guard out of the WCC, a high-scoring guard from San Diego. He left after that year because of eligibility. They end up, adding Stephon Castle, a high-level freshman. They add Cam Spencer, the transfer from Rutgers. They reloaded in a way that they needed to, and then they, boom, went ahead and won it again for a second year in a row. Really, really hard to imagine they do it 3 years in a row. Not because of the talent on the roster, not because of Mahaney specifically, but because it is so dang hard to win a championship 3 years in a row. It hasn't been done since the 1970s when UCLA dominated, when college basketball had way less teams in the NCAA tournament. Everything was different back when UCLA did that. So hard to even make the comparison here. But for UConn, they pick up a guard in Aidan Mahaney who averaged 14 points per game, 2.5 boards, 2.5 assists last year for the Gales. Now, Mahaney visited Creighton, Virginia, and Kentucky before he ultimately settled on going to UConn. As much as it pained me to see him enter the transfer portal because it's not good for Gonzaga, it's not good for the WCC, it's not good for mid-major college basketball, that players like this are able to leave and go somewhere else. I don't blame Aidan Mahaney because, again, the 4 schools that were highly in consideration for him are Kentucky, one of the biggest brands in college basketball, UConn, the back-to-back national champs, Creighton, a fantastic college basketball program, and Virginia, probably the least exciting of the group, especially right now, although they, of course, have a recent national championship and also play a style where he is used to having come from St. Mary's and Randy Bennett's system. But for him to have those be his options, you can understand why he entered the transfer portal, why he explored those options, and why he ultimately picked UConn. Although I am intrigued and I'll be honest, a bit skeptical. I'm a bit skeptical of how Aidan Mahaney's game translates to Danny Hurley's offense. Part of the reason I'm skeptical is because when Mahaney became a more high volume shooter, which is what I am perceiving will be his role, his ask for Danny Hurley and UConn, he wasn't as effective. What I mean by that is pretty simple. As a freshman, Aidan Mahaney took 5.3 3-point attempts per game. He made 40% of them. As a sophomore, Mahaney took 6.9 3-point attempts per game, and he made 35.5% of them. That's a pretty big jump in terms of number of attempts per game, and it is a pretty big drop in terms of percentage. There are almost certainly other factors at play. Looking at that data and saying simply the more shot attempts he takes, the least, he makes a smaller percentage of them is very rudimentary data collection. It's not foolproof. It doesn't prove anything necessarily, but it is a stat that stands out a little bit. More than that, from a pure eye test perspective, Mahaney plays well in a slower paced offense. He controls the tempo. He kind of knows when to attack the basket. You saw him be very good at picking his turns. He maybe has opportunities to attack. He slows it down. He kicks it out. They swing it back around. They use some clock. That's not what they're going to do at UConn. UConn's not Arizona. They're not Gonzaga. They're not Xavier. They're not this super high pace, like up and down, run type of offense. That's not what they are. They actually have a fairly below average tempo, but there's a lot more movement. There's a lot more involvement. And I think there's a bigger expectation of Mahaney potentially coming in to be a volume shooter. Now, I don't know that. Danny Hurley hasn't said that. Aidan Mahaney hasn't said that. There's potential other options to be pursued in the portal that could kind of fill more of a volume shooter type role. My argument is more so that if that is the role that UConn asks Aidan Mahaney to fill, I'm not sure that that's he's not Cam Spencer. And people have said, well, he's kind of like Cam Spencer. He's a lot smaller than Cam Spencer. And I'm not sure he's as versatile of a scorer as Cam Spencer. And I don't think he's as good of a high volume 3-point shooter. Now, he could prove me wrong quite easily. As somebody in the Discord channel I was speaking to earlier, I was kind of saying, I'm not sure about the fit tempo-wise. And they said, well, maybe the St. Mary's fit wasn't good for him, which is true. In that case, I don't know why he would have gone there in the first place. It's not like Randy Bennett has ever hidden what type of offense or what type of system that he runs. So if you look at their system and you think, I'm going to go there even though it doesn't fit my style, that's kind of on you. I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think Mahaney plays well in that system, and I think he's unproven that he can play in other systems. It doesn't mean he can't. It just means he's unproven, which is why I'm a little bit skeptical. Having said that, the fact that St. Mary's has put players at UConn and Iowa State, Joshua Jefferson transferring to Iowa State, that's 2 top 10 guaranteed teams in the country next year, possibly 2 top 5 teams in the country next year. And it's not like we didn't know that St. Mary's was good. They were a top 15 team at times last year, top 20, top 25 throughout a large chunk of the season. So clearly this is a very talented team, but it just continues to prove how good the WCC is, how great of a league this is from a talent perspective, that players from St. Mary's are going to UConn and Iowa State, and we're having other players who are going to big name schools as well. It's just a real testament to the depth and the talent in the WCC. And St. Mary's lost a couple other players as well. I'm just going to mention them here since we're on the St. Mary's train. Now, these were players who didn't play very much at St. Mary's and certainly aren't going to those higher level schools necessarily. But we saw recently that Jensen Bradkey, a backup for St. Mary's, is transferring to Montana. And Chris Howell, who didn't play much in his 2 years for the Gales, is transferring to UC San Diego. So lots of new homes for players who were on St. Mary's team last year. They added a big time transfer from Arizona. And I suspect they are not anywhere close to being done, and will add some more pieces in the transfer portal as well. Speaking of the transfer portal and speaking of UConn, Lisa Fortier's team picked up a guard who spent the last 2 seasons with the UConn Huskies. We're going to discuss that and more in just a second. Right after I tell you that today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, the weather is finally heating up, not today necessarily, but lately it has been a lot warmer here in the Pacific Northwest, and that means it is time to take in some Major League Baseball games. And great news, Game Time is now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app, folks, they actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. One of my favorite features on Game Time is their last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% buying last-minute tickets for not only sporting events, but concerts, comedy, and theater as well. I often worry about my tickets being fake, but with Game Time's ticketing coverage, your purchase is covered by the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry, and I really love having that peace of mind. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is also brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, it is playoff time in the NBA. We're going to talk about that in just a second. It's also playoff time in the NHL. Baseball is, of course, in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game. Because right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And folks, the UConn Huskies are not quite the overall favorite at FanDuel right now to win the 2025 National Championship. That is the Kansas Jayhawks, who are plus 1,000, but UConn is second at plus 1,100. If you're a big Aidan Mahaney fan and you're listening to the show and you're thinking, yep, UConn's going to do it, three-peat, hit that button right now. Folks, what are you waiting for? What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com right now, /lockedon, and make your first bet an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we're still talking about the UConn Huskies basketball programs, believe it or not, because the Zags, Lisa Fortier's team, added their first transfer of the offseason, and it is a player who has spent the last 2 seasons on Gino Ariema's team with the UConn Huskies. The name is Ines Bettencourt. She's a 5'9" guard from Portugal, and like I said, she has been at UConn the last 2 seasons, but she hasn't played much. She's played 53 games in the last 2 years, so she's been in the majority of contests, but she's averaged about 7.2 minutes per game, and the production has just been pretty much non-existent. In those 53 games, she's averaging 1 point per game, less than a rebound, less than an assist, about 0.8 in each category. And it's interesting, her story is kind of unique. She was actually initially committed to go to Northwest Florida Junior College. Again, she's from Portugal. She was overseas in Portugal looking to come to the United States to play college basketball, was going to go the junior college route, and then got a last-minute offer from UConn. That is a surprising jump from expected to go to junior college all the way to go into UConn. Part of the reason for that was that injury suffered by Paige Beckers, who is going to be back for another year next year with the UConn Huskies. Paige Beckers suffered an ACL injury in 2022, missed that entire season. UConn was looking to add some depth. Whatever the connection was, I'm not sure exactly. They landed on Bettencourt, said, we want to bring her to Storrs, Connecticut to play for UConn. She spent the last 2 years buried on the bench at UConn, but not playing at UConn doesn't really mean a whole lot. UConn's really, really good. And certainly for a player to have put up a very limited amount of production in 2 seasons at UConn to get the attention of a school like Gonzaga, obviously there's belief that there's some serious talent there that just hasn't been unlocked. And again, not getting to play at UConn doesn't really indicate that there's anything concerning about the profile, just that, hey, it's really hard to get playing time at UConn. And for Bettencourt, I assume she hoped she would get more playing time in year 3, but once Paige Beckers made that announcement, hey, I'm coming back, I think it was pretty logical at that point for Bettencourt to enter the transfer portal. She did so very shortly after the season ended for UConn, so it was pretty clear that that was something she had planned to do. She was in the portal for 3 to 4 weeks or so before making this commitment to Gonzaga. And guard depth is an area of need for Coach Lisa Fortier's team. We've talked about it a handful of times on the show. In fact, we've mentioned a few times on the show that we think that Fortier is going to supplement part of the roster with the transfer portal, in particular in the backcourt, because this team has Yvonne Ejim returning in the front court. a legitimate All-American candidate next year, WCC Player of the Year this past year, one of the best players in college basketball. She's coming back. And Maud Hybens, she's coming back as well. She's the 6th Woman of the Year this past year, coming off the bench. She's going to probably step into Eliza Hollingsworth's spot as in the starting lineup, assuming Hollingsworth does not come back. I can't remember off the top of my head if she has more eligibility or not, but I think Hybens is going to step into a bigger role. Either way, the front court, pretty good shape. But the backcourt, the Trunk Twins are gone. One of them is playing for the Washington Mystics, Kaylin. Obviously, Brenda Maxwell's gone. She's playing with the Chicago Sky right now. Kaylee is gone as well. You're losing a whole bunch of players in the backcourt. Peyton Muma is gone. She's entered the transfer portal. Bree Salin-Bien has not entered the transfer portal, but indicated that she has suffered another ACL injury. She's going to miss next season. She's reevaluating whether she's going to continue pursuing a basketball career. So for all intents and purposes right now, the assumption is that Bree Salin-Bien is no longer going to be a part of Gonzaga basketball's future as a guard in one of the guard spots. We're also losing Calli Stokes, and I'm going to talk about that momentarily because she gave a bit of an update on her situation after she entered the transfer portal and indicated that she was not looking to continue playing basketball. We'll talk about that in a second, but again, the Twins are gone, Maxwell's gone, Muma's gone, Salin-Bien's gone, Calli Stokes is gone. That is a ton of talent out of that backcourt for Lisa Fortier's team. Now, Claire O'Connor was a freshman last year. She had a very small role, but is likely going to step into a bigger role. Esther Little could step into a bigger role for this team as well. The team also has 2 incoming freshmen who are both guards. They have 3 incoming freshmen, the other one being Lauren Whitaker, but the 2 guards are Cristabel Osorobo and Allie Turner. Both were highly regarded guard prospects. Both could step into a role right away. Coach Fortier has generally not played freshmen a bunch right away. They just kind of have a developmental plan that they go through at Gonzaga, but those 2 could come in. They could fill valuable roles right away, or if not, they could at least provide valuable depth for this team at the guard spots. But looking at that, looking at all the players leaving, looking at the youth and inexperience of the players who are around who are going to be on this team next year, you could kind of see why Coach Fortier said we need to find some more guards and landed on somebody who spent the last 2 years learning from Gino Ariema and Paige Beckers and everybody else in that incredibly elite UConn basketball program. Excited to see what Bettencourt can do on the court when she gets that opportunity this season. And then I mentioned this about Calli Stokes, so I'm just going to say this here. We talked about it, I think, last week on the show. She has entered the transfer portal. The indication was that she was not looking to play basketball at her next school. We had seen an indication that she was potentially going to try to find a spot to play track and field. And she posted this on Instagram on Monday. I'm just going to read part of her statement on Instagram. She said, quote, "Towards the end of this season, I got a concussion while playing in a game. Having a history with this injury, questions and conversations arose regarding my long-term health and possible risks. I have decided to step away from basketball and will be transferring from Gonzaga University." So this is a bummer. Calli was somebody who played 2 seasons at Gonzaga. She averaged about 4 points, 3.5 boards, and 1 assist. Her 2 seasons were incredibly consistent, about 18 minutes, about 3.8 points per game in both seasons. There was an expectation that she might take a bigger jump this year and play more minutes, of course, because of that aforementioned exodus of guards for Gonzaga's team. But now, because of an injury, she's unable to suit up. Her and Bree Salin-Bien both suffering what appear likely to be career-ending injuries, at least on the basketball court. Really sad to see that. You just hate to see that. In the last year, between the 2 of them and Caden Perry suffering a season-ending injury on the men's side, it's a bummer to see players' careers end that way. You never want to see that. So excited about Bettencourt coming in and potentially filling a valuable role for Gonzaga, but sad for Calli that her basketball playing career at least has ended the way that it has. Hopefully, if she is interested in track and field, she didn't say that in this statement. We saw that from another source. If that is something she wants to do, hopefully she can find a place where that she can thrive in that area and not put herself in any more risk of further injury. Well, folks, we're going to close out the show today talking about Andrew Nembhard, who is crushing his first NBA playoff experience. But we're not even surprised. We're going to talk about Nembhard, Suggs, a couple other guys as well, all coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you that today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Folks, I've been told I'm a competitive person, and let's be honest, those people are right. I have a competitive side just like we all do, and my competitive side is a big fan of Monopoly Go. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's been downloaded over 150 million times. It is a great twist on Monopoly where you play on not one, but hundreds of Monopoly boards in crazy locations, building up amazing cities that bring you big money. But the best part is getting to mess with my friends. I can charge them rent on my iconic properties just like classic Monopoly, but now I can also rob their vaults of riches just for myself. And the leaderboards show me who the biggest Monopoly tycoon is. But it's not just my competitive side that loves it. You can team up with friends and people all around the world in time tournaments to earn huge rewards. So get in the game and join your friends. Download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or the Google Play Store. All right, folks, closing out the show today, talking about the NBA playoffs, where we have 4 Zags currently still in action. I'm only going to talk about Andrew Nembhard and Jalen Suggs today because both Chet Holmgren and Rui Hachimura, as I'm recording this, are playing on Monday evening. So I don't want to talk about that before they play that final game. So we'll get some coverage on them. If Oklahoma City sweeps here, if they move on, if the Lakers end up getting eliminated, we'll have some conversations about that later on this week. But for now, we're going to start the conversation with Andrew Nembhard. The Indiana Pacers are currently up 3-1 on the Milwaukee Bucks. Game 5 is slated for Tuesday. So today, as many of you are listening to this show, a lot of people Indiana was a trendy pick at first to be the upset here. That is 6 seed. Milwaukee is the 3 seed. And then after a really good first game for Damian Lillard for Milwaukee, everybody's like, wow, all those people who picked Indiana look silly. Here's the deal. The Pacers are 3-1 right now, have a very real chance of picking up a 5-game win over the Milwaukee Bucks here. And Andrew Nembhard has been a big part of the reason why. Through 4 games in this series with Indiana, Nembhard is averaging 14.3 points, 4.8 assists, and 3 rebounds. He has been extraordinarily efficient. He's shooting 61.1% from the field, 53.3% from deep. That's 8 of 15 from beyond the arc during this series. He also has a blistering 19-1 assist to turnover ratio. In a 4-game playoff series against a good Milwaukee team, a team that most expected to compete for a national or an NBA championship, Andrew Nembhard has 19 assists and 1 turnover. He's playing 35 minutes per game, starting point guard right now for the Indiana Pacers. I'm going to say it one more time. 19-1 is the assist turnover ratio for Andrew Nembhard. Incredible, extraordinary efficiency and just levels of performance right here. He also got in an altercation with Bobby Portis for the Milwaukee Bucks. He is talking his talk and walking his walk and just looking like an absolute dude right now for the Indiana Pacers. You absolutely love to see it. Andrew's one of the easiest players to root for in Gonzaga basketball history, in my personal opinion. A kid who goes to Florida, who wants to declare for the NBA as a one and done, doesn't have the kind of year that he expected to have for Florida, stays for a second year. Things kind of get better a little bit, not so much. Transfers to Gonzaga, takes on a complementary role to Jalen Suggs, who we'll talk about momentarily, thrives in a lead guard role his senior year, gets selected as the first pick in the second round of the NBA draft, secures the largest contract that a second round pick has ever received guaranteed in NBA history, and then goes out and just balls. I mean, he should have been an all-rookie second teamer. He was like a vote away from being an all-rookie second teamer as his first year. His second year, his role diminishes because Indiana brings in some guards that are going to play over him. And then now when it gets to playoff time and they need him, he steps up and does exactly what he does. Super efficient with the basketball, super efficient as a scorer, talking his crap, getting in altercations, but still getting it done on the court. There is nobody that is easier to root for Andrew Nembhard, and I am a full-on Indiana Pacers fan right now, hoping that they continue to advance and that Andrew Nembhard continues to cement his name in the legacy for the Indiana Pacers and as an NBA legacy if he continues to help lead this team through this playoff picture. Eventually, they'll have to run into the Orlando Magic and Jalen Suggs, and Jalen Suggs has been playing some great basketball as well. They are currently 2-2 in their series with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Game 5 is also on Tuesday, so for folks looking for something to do on Tuesday night, you can watch both Andrew Nembhard and Jalen Suggs in action. Through 4 games, Jalen Suggs is averaging 14.5 points, 4 rebounds, 3.8 assists, and 1.3 steals. He hasn't been super efficient as a scorer. He's shooting just 30% from 3, a little under 50% overall from the field. His best game was game 3. Cleveland won the first 2 games in the series, but Orlando won game 3, and part of that was because of 24 points from Jalen Suggs in that one. He also had 12 points in game 4. He did have 7 turnovers in that game. Not his most efficient night necessarily, but still good enough to help lead his team to a W. Like we said, it's 2-2 right now as Paolo Banchero, Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner, and that team look to go take Orlando to a potential 3-2 lead if they can win on Tuesday night against that Cleveland squad. Like I said, we're going to skip Chet Holmgren and we're going to skip Rui Hachimura for right now. But I do got another Gonzaga guard that I want to talk about, not playing in the NBA, but having a bunch of success across the pond. That is Gino Crandall, who is playing in the top German league right now. He's playing for EWE Baskets Oldenburg is the name of the team. And he was just named the player of the week in his league because he had a huge game. I think this game was played on Monday. 34 points for Gino, 4 assists. He also shot 7 of 9 from 3. The opposing team made 5 threes in total, and Gino was a blistering 7 for 9 from distance. He has played 23 games with Baskets Oldenburg. He is averaging 15.5 points, 5 assists, and 3.1 rebounds. And I like getting opportunities to talk about Gino Crandall's professional career on the podcast because he has had a remarkably successful pro career. And Gonzaga never really got to see Gino be the player that he's capable of being. He was a stud at North Dakota, transfers to Gonzaga to take on a third guard role, gets injured, has the hand injury, misses a huge chunk of his only season in Spokane with the injury. Outside of that, just doesn't have a ton of playing time because he's playing behind really talented guards, but he showed flashes of absolute excellence when he started his professional career. He was playing with Lancaster, the Lancaster Riders in the British Basketball League, and he was a 2-time MVP. Averaged like 16 points, 8 assists over 2 years, literally 2-time MVP. Ended up going to play straight into the top German league, which is a big jump in terms of basketball league hierarchy outside of the NBA. He played for BG Göttingen in the top German league in his first year. Incidentally, played alongside Matisse Merninghoff. That's a name that some of you Elder Zag fans will recall. He played 2 years at Gonzaga. It was just kind of a small bit role, but came to Gonzaga, played 2 years, ended up going back to Germany, and has played professionally ever since, and was partnered up with Gino Crandall on this team, despite them having, I think, playing like 9 or 10 or even 11 years apart in their Gonzaga basketball playing careers. And now he's playing with Baskets Oldenburg, and like we said, having games where he's putting up 34 points and dropping 7 threes. Love seeing it for Gino. Happy to see his continued success and looking forward to more updates from him as his season goes on. It's going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. Thank you so much to those of you who have made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. We'll be back this week. We're going to keep you updated on the transfer portal. It closes on Wednesday night. So on Thursday, we will know if any other Gonzaga players are thinking about entering the portal. We're going to have a much better sense of what that roster might look like. We're going to talk about that, continue our season in review series as well. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.